welcome to Live Interactive English. I'm Mike, and today we are going to be visiting space, the final frontier. Of course, we're going to call it the final frontier because space is, well, it's out there. It's anywhere off our planet. If we're going to the moon or the planets, the suns or the stars beyond, we are visiting space, the final frontier, because, you know, it's the land that we haven't explored. Usually the frontier, it separates the land we know, the land we've settled or explored, and the unknown. So space is definitely the final frontier, and we have explored only a tiny, tiny amount of it. But more and more people seem interested in space travel. We have a lot of plans coming up in the future from different countries to have space stations and people possibly even living on the moon and Mars in the not too distant future. Maybe in 5 or 10 years, hopefully in all of our lifetimes, we will be seeing people exploring and possibly living in space. And as you know, if you have enough money, you can give some to Richard Branson or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, and you can go to space, well, not tomorrow, but you can go to space soon. So as we kind of look to the future of space travel, it's also interesting to look back to the past, because really, if you guys have grandparents, a lot of them were born before space travel even started. So there you go. That's a pretty cool thing. So let's learn a little bit about the past, the present, and future of space, the final frontier. The article is coming up.
Do you dream of the stars? If so, you're in good company. Countless people throughout history have wondered about the heavens. We're lucky to live in the era of space exploration, with answers to our questions about the universe closer than ever before. Here's a look at some of our biggest achievements to date.
All right, so yes, when you see the final frontier, it's just another way of kind of saying space. You can think about space and space travel, because that is exploring the final frontier. So let's look at our article. We start with a sentence that I think a lot of us might have actually, we might have actually done this. It says, do you dream of the stars? Maybe not actually dreaming while you're sleeping of the stars, but have you ever sort of imagined or fantasized that in the future you might go into space, maybe become an astronaut, maybe live in space and work in space? Has that kind of interested you in any way? Well, if so, if you answer yes to that question, you're in good company. Being in good company means there's a lot of people like you. You would find a lot of friends and people who have the same idea, the same opinion on this. It says countless people throughout history have wondered about the heavens. Yeah, a lot of people, countless people, so many people that if you counted them, it would be such a big number. Don't count them. A lot of people have wondered and imagined and dreamed about the heavens, about space travel and the final frontier. But of course, a lot of those people 100 years ago or more, they could only dream about the heavens and space. They could only dream about flying, because a lot of the modern technology that we have today is quite new. They didn't have it a long time ago. And that's kind of leads us to the next part of the article. It says, we're lucky to live in the era of space exploration, with answers to our questions about the universe closer than ever before. Yeah, we are very lucky to live in this era in this way, because space travel and science have taken huge leaps and jumps in the past few decades. And of course, this is something that we think of as very normal. People going to space for us is very normal, but for your parents and grandparents when they were young, it would have been something from a movie, from a science fiction novel or a comic. It wouldn't be normal, because we're in the era of space travel. This little word, era, you can also pronounce it era. It's basically one big important time in history, a period of history. A lot of things change in an era or an era. The world enters it and exits it, begins the era and ends it in a very different state, in a very different situation. And we often put names on era. I guess you could say today we live in the digital era, the computer era, the information era, right? Computers and social networks and the internet have totally changed the world, politics, society, that kind of thing. If we think of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, that was the Renaissance era. And of course, if we think of, I don't know, Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama, that was the era of exploration, of traveling the oceans and discovering continents and all that kind of stuff. So the era we're living in today is very technological, and it also includes space travel. Let's talk about Mark's grandfather. Mark's grandfather lived through the era of steam trains. Wow, so Mark must be quite old because his grandfather must be even older. All right, back to the article. Here's a look at some of our biggest achievements to date. So going back to the very beginning of space exploration right up to now, we're going to look at some of the big events and moments from that past, from that history, right after our break.
Hello， 大家好，我是 Hanny。今天的课文标题是 The Final Frontier。那么 frontier 这个名词就表示国境啊、边境，也可以用来指可能是探索活动等等的新领域。那么标题用到 The Final Frontier 来表达最后的边疆。从这个太空探险的观点来看，就是指外太空咯。好，课文一开始问说，你向往星星吗？如果会啊，像你这样的人是大有人在的。历史上有无数个人对天空是感到好奇的。那我们很幸运可以生活在太空探索的时代。我们这2天的课程就要来看看到目前为止人类进行太空探索的一些成就。好，单字 era 或是念作 era， 它表示时代啊、年代或是时期。像我们说 digital era 就是指数位时代。Mike 老师则有提到文艺复兴时期，那么 Renaissance 就是表达文艺复兴哦。再来补充单字 exploration， 它表示探测或是探勘。那另外老师在讲到幻想去别的星球啊，想象自己成为太空人的时候，他用到 fantasize 这个动词 F-A-N-T-A-S-I-Z-E fantasize 它就表示想象或是幻想。那么文中也有提到这个 astronaut 就是太空人。好，这边一个重点，我们进入文法时间。好，我们来看这个重点是 be in good company， 它表示有同样情形的大有人在，用来指说还有很多人都有相同的情况啊、问题或是见解。那么 company 在这边是当不可数名词来指同伴、伙伴，不是当作公司来解释哦。好，那像这样的用法，我们也可以把它写作 have plenty of company。举例来说 ，If you're confused about your future, you're in good company。你也可以说 If you're confused about your future, you have plenty of company。如果你对未来感到迷惘，很多人都跟你一样。好，接着回到课文中。
The first successful satellite. On October 4th, 1957, the space age kicked off with the launch of Sputnik 1, the very first man-made object to pass beyond Earth's atmosphere. As the satellite circled the globe, it sent valuable information back to Earth in its first 21 days before it burned up on re-entry 3 months later. The first person on the moon. Among the most important events of the past century was the 1969 Apollo 11 mission, which sent 3 American astronauts to the moon. People around the world held their breath as they watched the historic event on TV. Neil Armstrong was the first to set foot on the moon's surface, and he famously announced that it was one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind.
All right, so if we're going to be learning about the history of humans and human exploration in space, why not go back to the very first thing that humans actually put up into space? As it says there, the first successful satellite. That's a good point. There were probably a few unsuccessful satellites before that. We're not going to worry about those. We're only going to talk about the ones that worked the successful ones. And it's true, before a person or a monkey or even a dog went up in space, satellites were up there already for just a short amount of time. But still, a satellite is something that goes around the Earth in a big circle. Man-made satellites are the ones that we put up on rockets, and they have all sorts of scientific equipment. They have cameras to take pictures of the Earth. GPS satellites tell us where we are. Communication satellites send TV and radio and telephone signals all over the world. Taiwan is actually pretty good at sending satellites up into space. They help to monitor weather and typhoons to keep us safe here on Earth. We can also, though, use satellites to talk about things like moons and asteroids, things that kind of spin and move around planets and things like that. But generally, when we see this word satellite, we're thinking of the machines that people make that put up in space to help us understand the Earth and space itself. For example, we could say old satellites make up a lot of the space junk that circles Earth. It's true, a lot of those satellites go up there. After a few years, they stop working, and then they stay up there, so satellite garbage or junk is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. But we'll worry about that later. Let's talk about the first satellite. When it went up there, space was super clean. No garbage up there. This was the first piece that we made. But at the time, it was a wonderful discovery of science. And when was that time? On October 4th, 1957. Ah, yes, I remember. No, I don't remember that day. On October 5th, 1957, the space age kicked off with the launch of Sputnik 1, or Sputnik 1, the very first man-made object to pass beyond Earth's atmosphere. In other words, they put it on a rocket, they shot it up a couple hundred miles into space, and there it was, and it went around the world in a big circle going beep, 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 with some little radio antennas sticking off it. It was the first satellite. It wasn't much, but it was pretty special at the time. And when you put something into space, a rocket, the astronauts in the rocket, or a satellite, you launch those things. That's a bit of a different word from what airplanes do, right? Airplanes take off from a runway, but rockets, I guess because they're flying in a different way, we launch rockets. We'll see a rocket launch on television from Florida or from parts of South America or maybe Russia or China, depending on who is launching or sending the rocket from the Earth up into space using huge amounts of power and rocket engines. Let's talk about NASA. NASA will launch its next moon rocket later this month. Well, I don't know if that's the schedule, but they have been launching some moon rockets recently. And when rockets leave the Earth, of course, they have to fly through the clouds, through the air, through all of the things that keep us alive and give us weather. And that bubble of gas around the Earth with oxygen and nitrogen and all those other things, that bubble of air is called the atmosphere. The atmosphere is what keeps us alive. It's what gives us oxygen. It's also where our weather kind of happens with wind and clouds and rain and things like that. And of course, as you go further away from the Earth, the atmosphere gets thinner and thinner. It gets harder and harder to breathe. Unlike Earth, Mars has no protective atmosphere around it, so you cannot breathe on Mars. You have to bring your oxygen with you. They don't have an atmosphere. Back to the article. As the satellite circled the globe, it sent valuable information back to Earth in its first 21 days before it burned up on re-entry 3 months later. Well, that's nice to know that Sputnik did not create space garbage or junk. It burned up 3 months after it was launched. But of course, by that time, it had circled the globe many, many times. When we say globe, basically you can think world, all right? When we talk about the globe, we're talking about the world. A globe is a round shape, but we wouldn't call a ball a globe. It's really just the world. But it's definitely not a map of the world like you might see on the wall in your classroom, but maybe over in the corner of your classroom, you have that map that is on a ball-shaped object with all the all the countries and oceans of the world. That is the globe. So when we use the globe, it could be that thing in your classroom, or we could just say it's the world. I'm going to fly around the globe on my holiday next year. I'm flying around the world. For example, the famous actor is recognized around the globe, around the world. He's world famous, but nobody on the moon knows this guy. It's only around the globe, so that's interesting. Back to the article. The first person on the moon. Oh yeah, this guy, I think I remember the name. Of course, you guys probably know the name of the first person on the moon. And then we read among the most important events of the past century was the 1969 Apollo 11 mission, which sent 3 American astronauts to the moon. Yes, this of course was Apollo 11, the first time people had actually walked on the moon. And then we see people around the world held their breath as they watched the historic event on TV. I didn't see it. I think my parents saw it. I heard about it, but you can watch, I'm sure, clips of it on YouTube back in 1969. This was one of the biggest stories that ever happened. And yes, I think a lot of us know the name of the first person. Neil Armstrong was the first to set foot on the moon's surface, and he famously announced that it was one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. Those are famously not actually the first words spoken from the moon, but maybe the first words spoken after someone stepped foot on the moon. So there's a little difference there, but it's a very interesting history and also a huge moment in human civilization. That's all we have time for today, but we're going to be back with more amazing events in space history, so do come back and join us for that. If you're on another planet, that is an excuse to not be here. But if you're on Earth, you got to come back and watch. See you soon.
好，首先来看看第一个成就是在1957年的10月4号。那么随着史普尼克1号的发射，太空时代揭开序幕了。这是第一颗飞越地球大气层的人造物体。那这颗人造卫星环绕地球运行的时候呢，它有在前21天把珍贵的资讯传回地球。那3个月后，它在重返大气层的时候烧毁了。我们来看单字 satellite， 它就表示人造卫星或是卫星。Mike 老师刚刚提到 asteroid。asteroid asteroid 表示小行星，还有提到 antenna 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 表示天线的意思。好，下一个单字 launch 可以当名词或动词去表达发射，可能像是发射火箭啊、卫星或导弹等等。那这个字呢，也可以表达推出，像我们要说推出新商品，就会用这个动词去表达那个动作。再来 atmosphere， 它表示大气层或是大气，也有气氛氛围的意思。老师在讲解的时候提到 oxygen 就是氧或是氧气， nitrogen 就是氮或是氮气。好，再来看到 globe 这个名词，它可以指球状物、地球仪，那也可以用来指地球，这时候常写作 the globe。好，再来课文接着写到说，上个世纪最重要的事件之一就是1969年的阿波罗11号任务。这个任务啊，将3名美国太空人送上月球。那世界各地的人就在电视机前面见证着历史性的一刻。那我们知道这个尼尔·阿姆斯壮呢，就是第一个踏上月球表面的人。那他那一句名言就是说啊，我个人的一小步，这个一个人的一小步，却是人类的一大步。好，那这边我们2个重点要进入文法时间。好，来看第一个重点是 burn up， 它可以指烧成灰烬或是焚毁。那么当这个意思的时候，它可以当不及物用或者是当及物用。我们就来看看它的用法。第一种，你可以用 something 加上 burn up， 例如 Their house burned up in a fire years ago。他们的房子在多年前的一场火灾中烧毁了。好，第二个用法是你可以用 fire burns something up。举例来说。The fire burned up most of their furniture. 那场火灾烧毁了他们大部分的家具。好，再来看到第二个重点是主词补语的倒装用法。我们要强调主词补语，或者是避免主词比较长，然后导致这个句子头重脚轻的时候，你就可以把主词补语移到句首。那么这时候呢，要把主词跟动词倒装。好，以句型来看，原本句型可能是主词加 be 动词加主词补语，那么倒装后变成主词补语加 be 动词加主词。好，举例来说 ，A note left by his brother was lying on the table。好，那现在呢是表达说他哥哥留的纸条在桌上。我们如果把主词补语 lying on the table 移到句首，经过倒装，那就会写成 Lying on the table was a note left by his brother。好，以上是今天的讲解，同学别走开，马上回来哦。
Do you dream of the stars? If so, you're in good company. Countless people throughout history have wondered about the heavens. We're lucky to live in the era of space exploration, with answers to our questions about the universe closer than ever before. Here's a look at some of our biggest achievements to date. The first successful satellite. On October 4th, 1957, the space age kicked off with the launch of Sputnik 1, the very first man-made object to pass beyond Earth's atmosphere. As the satellite circled the globe, it sent valuable information back to Earth in its first 21 days before it burned up on re-entry 3 months later. The first person on the moon. Among the most important events of the past century was the 1969 Apollo 11 mission, which sent 3 American astronauts to the moon. People around the world held their breath as they watched the historic event on TV. Neil Armstrong was the first to set foot on the moon's surface, and he famously announced that it was one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hi, I'm Josh.
I'm Carolyn.
Today we're going to be playing Word Drop. We're each have 3 cards with words or phrases on them, and we haven't even seen them, so we don't know what's going on. We got to weave them into a casual conversation, so let's do it.
All right.
Yeah, take us down this road.
Sometimes I feel like I should have been born earlier. Like, I think back to like different decades, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and wonder what era I would have lived best in.
Oh, I'm picking up what you're putting down. I do that as well. I often think, and hindsight is 20/20. So it's so much easier to think that I would have been more well-adjusted or had a better life in a different time period. It always seems like the opportunities were so much more easier and so much more bountiful back then. But I've sort of changed my thinking a bit. Now I've learned to just appreciate my current surroundings and atmosphere.
Yeah, if I think back to like different times, I think about like all the things that society has accomplished. Like, it's hard to believe that several decades ago a man walked on the moon. I mean, we even have a satellite in space now.
Mate, it is unbelievable the amount of just leaps forward in terms of space exploration. Often I watch a lot of space documentaries and I'm just so incredibly mesmerized by Jupiter. And it just blows my mind when you zoom out from the planet. We're just here on a globe.
Yeah, we are. It's interesting to think that at this point, we might even have the chance to go to space ourselves. Like previously, and up until now, it's been mostly professionals, astronauts. But I wonder if someday just regular people will be able to get in a rocket and launch into space.
Yeah, totally. And I reckon, I think we will. I think we will. I think that we will, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's kind of the future that I want to happen, but I definitely feel that that's the direction in which we're headed. But I would feel a lot more comfortable if I was on a rocket with astronauts, because they've done the training, they know what's going on, and I want to know that I'm in good company.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not going to space with amateurs. That's for sure. Yeah, that would be nice.